All right, today we're going to dive into this really powerful metaphor for a problem that can totally fracture faith communities from the inside out. We're talking about church gangs. And yeah, I know, it's a pretty intense term, right? But that's the point. It's designed to make us all stop and think about what division really is and how it can start to grow, even in places that are supposed to be safe.
So you're probably wondering, what in the world are church gangs? And no, we're not talking about actual street gangs in a church, obviously. It's a metaphor for a certain kind of mindset, an attitude of strife, of competition, that can just poison the well of any spiritual community. So let's explore where this powerful idea even comes from.
So this whole idea, it actually comes from the writings of Elder N.L. Gadson. And his core warning is super clear and powerful. Anytime you see a teaching that puts division over unity, you can bet it's probably self-serving. At its heart, it's really all about building yourself up by tearing other people down. Okay, so let's really break this down. What does this mindset of strife and competition actually look like day to day? Well, according to Elder Gadson, the definition is pretty straightforward. It's any action that is attempting to be harmful towards specific saints. And when he says saints, he's just talking about fellow believers, people in the faith. And this harm, it's not always physical. We're talking gossip, contempt, belittling someone, basically anything that creates conflict and chaos inside the group. And here you can see the kind of stuff that really defines this whole gang mentality. It's everything from selfish ambition to, actively talking trash about a competing ministry. You see the pattern here, right? It all comes from the same place, pride. Lashing out just to make your own position or your own little group look stronger than everybody else's. Okay, so if that's the poison, what's the antidote? Well, our sources point to something they call the humility masterclass. This is where author Blaize On'Fyah comes in. She takes a look at the second chapter of the biblical book of Philippians and frames it as a masterclass on humility. She sees it as more than just theology. It's like a practical game plan to shut down all that ego, that look-at-me energy that really fuels all this division in the first place. And this slide, wow, it really breaks down the ultimate example of that humility. It talks about how Jesus, even though he had this incredible divine status, he didn't use it as a power move. Instead, he became a servant, and he humbled himself to the lowest possible point. And check out the result of all this. Because he went low, he was given the highest honor. The big takeaway here, real greatness comes from serving people, not from feeling superior. But wait, we can actually go even deeper with this idea. When you start comparing different biblical traditions, like the Ethiopian Ge'ez version, it's like the intensity gets cranked up a notch. The text doesn't just say servant, it says bond servant, which was the lowest possible social status you could have. It really hammers home just how radical this whole move was. It wasn't just stepping down, it was going to the absolute bottom. All right, so you've got this personal humility thing down, but how does that scale up to the whole community? Well, the next big idea is that it should expand into a vision of love for all the churches. Elder Gadson points us to the Apostle Paul as a great example of this. See, Paul didn't just care about his home church or the ones he personally started. He didn't just worry about his own little group. He was concerned about everybody, all over the place, no matter if their church was doing great or was a total mess. His concern was for all the churches. And man, Elder Gadson just lays it out with this incredibly powerful quote. He says, "You can't love part of the body and have hate for the rest." When he says the body, he means the entire community of believers, everywhere. He's calling out the hypocrisy of saying you want your church to do well while you're actively trying to destroy another one. It just doesn't add up. Okay, so this brings up a really important question, right? How do we spot the leaders who are actually creating all this division to begin with? Blaize On'Fyah has a great way of putting it. She calls it a security alert for the community. She pulls from the book of 2 Peter, chapter 2, and describes it almost like a warning label for spotting these false teachers. These are the people who, as she puts it, are just in it for the bag, secretly using manipulation and fake energy just to profit from everyone else. So this slide basically gives us the anatomy of a divisive leader. Let's look at the pattern. They don't respect authority, they just act on instinct. And that metaphor, wells without water, it's so good. They promise you everything. They promise you fulfillment, but they're completely empty on the inside. And maybe the biggest contradiction of all, they promise you freedom, while they themselves are totally trapped. Yeah, the text uses a pretty graphic proverb here to make its point. Basically, it's saying it's way worse to know the truth and then go back to your old destructive habits than to have never known the truth at all. The stakes are really, really high when it comes to falling into these self-serving patterns.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about spotting the fakes and rejecting division, but that leads to one final, really crucial question. How do we do all that without becoming just as cynical and divisive ourselves?
To wrap this whole thing up, let's go back to Blaize On'Fyah for one last super important piece of wisdom. She says the absolute key is to be able to distinguish between an evil person/fake prophet and a person teaching you something right that may be new to you. See, the point isn't to build up a bunch of walls and be suspicious of everyone. It's about having the wisdom to know when someone is truly destructive versus when someone is just challenging your perspective.
And that really leaves us all with a pretty big challenge, doesn't it? How can we, in our own lives and our own communities, stand up against that spirit of division, while at the same time making sure we stay humble and open enough to hear the truth, even if it comes from somewhere we don't expect? That's the balance we've got to find. Thanks for digging into this with me.